Welcome back to the HR Happy Hour Show. My name's Steve Bowes. I am joined by, of course, Trish D. Trish, how are you today?
I'm fantastic. Looking forward to this show, Steve. How are you?
I am well. Thank you for asking. No, I'm excited. This is maybe the best show we'll ever do, or the final
This is
show.
it.
Maybe
Maybe we
maybe
should just end right
maybe
here.
both the same. No, we're excited to celebrate our 15th year anniversary, which we've been celebrating over the last few weeks, and we've assembled a wonderful group of folks to join us. If you're lucky enough to be watching on YouTube, you already see all their happy faces or their faces, either one. And before we start introducing them, we have to thank our friends at Paychex, of course, Trish. They've been with us for a big chunk of our 15 years. They're wonderful people doing great work, especially with the small and mid-sized business community. And so thanks to them. And you can go to paychex.com/AWIA for lots of really good stuff. And one thing I'll say about Paychex, Trish, real quick, is I was out at SHRM last week, which is another story entirely. We'll have to have a conversation
We have
about
to have
that.
a whole show on
That's
that.
mayhem, by the way. I haven't been to the SHRM event in a long time.
I haven't either.
Holy moly. I just want to say one thing. If you're an HR tech person or HR tech vendor and you're trying to figure out your booth for this year, I have got two words I'm going to recommend based on my SHRM. It's not, well, puppies would be the first. If you can't do puppies, skee ball
Oh,
machines. Pop a couple skee ball machines in each corner of the booth. People will line up for skee ball. I'm telling you.
did they have hair bows there as well? I always remember there was always like jewelry and then hair bow booths at Sherman's.
It was a wild scene. We'll have to talk about that some other
Okay,
time. So thanks to them. And I did meet with them at SHRM though. That's why I brought it up and shot a couple of videos with our friends at Paychex, which you'll be seeing soon. So
very good.
Trish, we got to start introducing our guests. We have so many wonderful people who've taken their time out of their day to join us, which I'm thrilled about. Let's start from the start. First off, let's please welcome Cecile Alper-Leroux. Cecile was the GVP of Research and Innovation at UKG, where she fostered a culture of innovation, resulting in the delivery of people-centric technology solutions. Cecile is an economic anthropologist and a best-selling author of From Dissonance to Resonance, Bringing Your People and Organization into Sync, and most recently has been an advocate for equitable cognitive diversity at work. And this is the coolest part ever here, Trish, an
Mhm.
oleoculture. I think I hopefully said that right, which
You
is
did.
a producer of olive oil, which is fantastic, in Provence, France. Cecile,
Wow.
welcome and hello.
Hello. Delighted to be here. Thank you. That was quite the intro, Steve. Thank you.
You have quite the career and getting more interesting by the minute, I think. And we'll talk about that on our other podcast,
You will. You will.
Olive Oil Weekly. So next we have Don Weinstein. Don is a strategic advisor, venture investor, and corporate board member, and honestly, the first ever 5-time, I think, HR Happy Hour guest.
Yes.
He was previously ADP's chief product and technology officer, responsible for all aspects of ADP's global technology strategy and delivery, where he successfully introduced numerous new products and industry firsts, among the hugely successful ADP mobile app, the ADP Marketplace, and the ADP Data Cloud, among others. Don, welcome back to the show. And not that maybe you care that much anymore, but I will say the ADP Data Cloud was very cool. And I remember the first time I saw it, I was like, wow, this is really good stuff.
Of course I care. It's one of my babies.
Yeah,
How
that
can
was
how
awesome.
can we not? And do I get like a jacket for 5 times or something? I feel,
Oh,
maybe like a varsity letter. I don't know.
we
There are a
should
Oh
few
my
do
of
gosh,
us.
we
that.
need
Come on,
totally do
Don.
that.
There are a few of us.
We should. It's right.
We all, right?
There
I
are.
think this group is at least at that mark right now.
All right, I'm gonna keep plowing through intros. Don, welcome and good to see you.
Thanks.
Meg Bear is with us. She's a technology executive, board member, patent holder, and change agent and startup advisor, keynote speaker, and TEDx host. She has a bachelor in science in economics and entrepreneurship and is committed to using her talents to close opportunity gaps and help others achieve their full potential. Meg, welcome back to the show, and it's great to see you.
It is great to be here. I'm in lovely Bay Area. It's sunny and I'm excited to be with this group. Thanks for including me.
All right, thank you. Great to see you. I'm gonna continue on. Trish, after I'm done with intros, you got to take over the show for a
I
minute.
was gonna say the show's gonna be over. We've got
Yeah.
so many great people.
I am so excited to see Gretchen Alarcon today. Gretchen has more than 20 years of innovation experience at the intersection of people and technology and is passionate about building products to transform HR and the employee experience with digital workflows. Recognized as a top HR tech thought leader, she has a unique view of the challenges many organizations face as they reimagine the future of work, and one of our best friends of the show ever. So that's not in the bio, but I said it. Gretchen, great to see you.
Thank you. I'm so thrilled to be here. This is one of my favorite times to get to hang out with you and see some old friends. This is super
Yeah,
cool.
awesome. Thank you for being here. Next up, we have Mike Carden. He's an entrepreneur, artist, author, father, traveler, and plane crash survivor. This show will be not, only slightly less scary. He's the co-founder of Joyous, which makes it easy to gather feedback from your frontline employees, and previously founded early HR SaaS company Sonar 6, and quite rightly, a legendary company and a legendary person in our space. Mike Carden, welcome and good to see you. And thank you for staying up in the middle of the night to join us from New Zealand.
Well, I'm getting up early, in fact.
All right, love it.
It's dark, but that's because the sun has not yet risen, although it is winter. So it's not that early, to be fair. Lovely to see you all. Lovely to be on the show.
Thank you, Mike. And last but certainly not least, great friend of our show, Lisa Sterling. She's the Chief People Officer at Perceptix, who I just got a demo from recently, by the way. I'll talk about that some other time. Very cool stuff. Her superpowers enable her to excel in disrupting the HR landscape, driving cultural and organizational excellence, and leading transformational change. She's also the proud mom to 3 young women and the wife to 1 fabulous man. Well, good for him. Lucky guy, I'd say. Lisa, hi, how are you?
I'm good. It's good to see everyone. Thanks for having me.
Yes, so great for everybody to be here. We are labeling this show The Legends of HR Tech, which quite honestly, that we couldn't think of a better name for this group, and that's it. That's the name, and thank you again for being here. Trish, I got to take a pause. I'm throwing it to you. You can maybe
You're throwing it to me?
Get us started.
Yeah, I mean, I think like anybody who's been listening to the show over the course of 15 years, this group that we've assembled today have been on the show numerous times, and for good reason, though. I mean, we really wanted to bring back people who had made not only an impact in the industry, but an impact on the show and on the listeners. These are the people who have taught us the most out of anyone that's come on the show, the ones that got the highest amount of listens and downloads over the years for the various topics, and just being very generous with sharing what you all know. So welcome to the show, everyone. What we'd love to start out first with, though, is really talking about, I mean, we've been around for 15 years and a lot's changed, right? Some things have remained the same, but there's been such a pace of change. So maybe we throw it to Meg, how about you first? And we'll kind of go around and talk about what were you doing 15 years ago? And this could be what were you doing in terms of work or family or both? And what are you doing now? So maybe we wanted to kind of start off with what's that progression look like for people who eventually wound up in executive high-level positions that are impacting the industry on whole.
Yeah, so the first time of joining the HR happy hour, I have to say I actually had a swing and a miss because we were building a new set of products at Oracle after being acquired from PeopleSoft. And those products had not yet reached market. So I got invited to come on the show, and there was some hesitation that I might share some super secret information. And at the last minute was told I wasn't allowed to join. So 15 years ago, I was in the trenches of trying to learn and imagine what the future was going to be. And your voices, Trish, I know you weren't on this show, but I was already a big fan, were a big part of how I started to connect with the community and how I started to think about what technology needed to look like in the future. So I am just a huge fan and so delighted how far we've all come from where we were at that moment 15 years ago.
Were there things I mean, I remember becoming an analyst, and that was right about that time. When I was also a guest on the show for the first couple of years. I wasn't a host, but definitely going out to each of the companies you all worked with, right? And learning about the industry from sort of the behind the scenes, how things are not just imagined, but then built, right? Put into practice. Meg, as you were in that role, like what were there things that you were thinking about then that are just now really starting to take hold? Because I feel like there's about a 10-year gap sometimes between innovation and actual into regular practice with HR.
Yeah, I think the 10 years is exactly right. It could be just even a little bit longer, but at that moment, we were really starting to think about what today we would call employee experience, right? How do you think about user experience? How do you think about engagement? And how do you think about connecting the understanding of the individual to the needs of the organization? So I'll give a shout to the Sonar 6 innovation of thinking about top talent differently, thinking about visualization and long-term understanding strategically of where your top talent was. And then, of course, the early things like performance management, e-learning, all the things that would connect with an individual in those early days. This was all kind of where both technology was, but where the thinking was around what the role of HR was supposed to be and what the role of the individual. So we were talking self-service, right? Which back in the day meant something very different than what we would think about today. But yeah.
And there was a lot of pushback. I remember being a practitioner and our employees did not want self-service. They said, I remember I've had a
managers?
conversation,
Yeah,
right?
you
I
trust
know.
managers to do things on their own. That was a huge issue, wasn't it?
They
That
said that it
Absolutely.
wasn't.
You
HR
can't
was
do
not
that.
approaching it with heart. And I distinctly remember a very early conversation with Gretchen where we were talking about that and how, that they wanted HR to be that heart that cared about them and that, and so they felt like self-service was taking that away. So
Yeah. I remember in those days at Oracle, we used to joke about how I was trying to build out the softer side of Oracle because we were the HCM vendor. PeopleSoft we purchased PeopleSoft. I came with that group, and my whole point was we're building these products, but I have got to get people to understand that there are people who use these products, and we have to know what they want to do and how they want to interact. Otherwise, this is never going to be a success. So it was a big challenge back then.
Yeah, and PR nixing Meg's appearance, right? That's a case in point, right? Working on the softer side of things. But yeah, well said, Gretchen and Meg as well. Mike, you got name dropped in the Meg comments.
Yeah.
Your
Mike.
company did, your former company, Sonar 6, which was certainly quite innovative for its time, and honestly would still be innovative today if it showed up today. But you came from outside of HR, right, Mike? If I'm remembering your background
Yeah.
correctly, I loved
Well, I kind of
how you
came.
were thinking about some of this HR stuff with a different lens, especially back then.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, isn't it? I mean, I did come from outside of HR. I came from kind of other sides of software, and yeah, much more, I guess, user-oriented stuff to the maybe, which is not really where HCM was at the time, right? And so, yeah, I guess we were inventive, then in the HR tech space, but it's kind of like being the tallest dwarf at that point, really. Like it was, sorry, that's probably not the best way of putting it, but like it was, the bar wasn't that high, I don't think. And all of us were really focused on one thing, which was the cloud. Like we were really focused on this idea of taking on-premise software and putting it on the cloud, and that's actually how you built the business. So there was lots of innovation going on, but the fundamental driver was we were putting stuff in the cloud, and it's a beautiful era at the beginning of SaaS because you didn't actually have to be that good. Like you just had to put it in the cloud.
Right.
And Salesforce took CRM and put it in the cloud, and here you go. There's a big business. And so a lot of the fundamental driver of us is that we're going to do performance reviews and we're going to put them in the cloud, which is very, very different than now. Trust me, it's very different now. But I think the main thing has changed, not just the tech landscape. And I think that Meg talked about the 10-year gap, right? Yeah, we were talking about integration in 2009, like it was a thing, like it actually worked, and it sort of works now, right? Yeah, now it's kind of got to this point where actually we're bringing lots of data together and we're we're creating value out of that. But most of the time, then we were sort of talking about it rather than actually doing it. And so that stuff, the tech shifted. Obviously, AI changed a lot, but also it's easy to forget how much the world of work changed, right? Even over the last 5 years, the world of work changed so much that lots of the UX and way we design stuff to interact with the populace of an organization, that whole populace changed. I remember talking about on this radio show the difference between Gen X employees and millennial employees. I mean, what a stupid idea that seems now. But that was a big thing, right? Like it was, like the sort of generational shift in the enterprise.
I'm glad you mentioned the generations because that was such a big thing then. And now you would think, millennials and Gen X are like best buddies, right? We're all in it together. And and I watch on TikTok where Gen Z is like picking on Gen X, and millennials will show up and be like, "Oh, don't do that. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Don't mess with them, right? Don't poke the bear." So it's very different. And I will say, Mike, one of the things I remember, again, being a very different space 15 years ago myself, it was so innovative because you were showing up and definitely had a better ability because you were the creator, right? You could push the limits a little bit more and in a very different way than we were thinking in HR. So I definitely still had people saying, I'm only going to do my performance evaluations in a Word doc, period, if I even do them at all, right? So you were really shaking up the landscape, I think, for practitioners who would go to events and see you and hear about the product. It was really innovative at the time.
Well,
It was a fun time, wasn't it?
yeah,
Right?
it
Just-
was.
Your
It's
booth,
such a
your
green
booth,
field. Yeah.
his booth was super innovative. I remember everyone
Mhm.
talking about the cardboard boxes, and it's just like, you
Yes.
have to see this booth. It was
Yeah.
like this just
Absolutely, yeah.
totally groundbreaking.
Like the one thing I did in my life, isn't it? You know?
Yeah, no, you're gonna be talking. I know. The last
The
time
cardboard box is following me around.
we had Mike on the show, I had to ask. You're obligated to ask that question about the cardboard box and tell the cardboard box story. But it does seem quaint, maybe in some ways now, in 2024 to think back at the cloud as being such a disruptive technological change, and it really disrupted this industry as well as others, right? But certainly this one where Meg mentioned trying to get software migrated to the cloud or build new software for the cloud when you were an enterprise provider, which wasn't doing cloud, right? And Don, maybe you could even comment from some of this from your perspective. Certainly, where you were would have been wrestling with some of these things as well.
Yeah, for sure. So 15 years ago was actually when we brought out our first mobile app. And another great case example of there was tremendous amount of pushback of people saying, I don't want it. I don't want my employees to have it. They're just gonna ask me questions about how to support. They were fearful that they were going to turn into mobile device support hotlines. I kid you not. And now it seems almost anachronistic, right, to be talking about it. But
We used to
that's
do
where we
sessions at HR Tech, like mobile HR. That was like a theme I had for a
yeah, it
couple
was
of
a
years. Yeah.
Yeah.
it was a big deal when it first came out. The idea that said, "Yeah, I'm going to run my whole payroll off my mobile app," did not seem very conventional. But to your point, whatever that gestation period is, 10 years or so, and now it's old hat. But it was quite transformational at the time. And the other one too, just to dive back on, Steve, since you mentioned the data cloud and
Mhm.
and back to Trish's life cycle, because that was more than 10 years ago, and now of course Gen AI is all the rage. Of course, you need to have a really solid foundation of data underneath it to train Gen AI models, and it seems there's a proliferation of models happening. And my point of view was always the differentiation is going to be down in terms of the underlying core data asset, how quality it is, how reliable it is, versus just trying to train AI models on unreliable data, if I were to put it generously. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I remember being also there was I was customer at the time, ADP customer, and at the time we had like nothing else. And so I was trying to use a very, very, very old version of ADP because we were too cheap to upgrade at that time. But it's like we were trying to piecemeal it to use it for every way we were operating the people side of our business. And so for me, it's been super exciting though to watch, that entire transformation, not just from ADP, but through all of the technologies you all have worked with. Because when I truly mean this, when I look at each of those solutions today, and if I would have had any of that 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I might not have left HR. I mean, seriously, HR got to be so difficult in that sort of transition from on-prem to cloud. And if they, I guess the people that stuck it out win, right? They now have these solutions, but seriously, it was very difficult to do an HR job without some of the technologies. To your point, Don, like mobile. I mean, you wouldn't even be able to operate without mobile today, right?
Yeah,
So
it's a good thought experiment. Could you go back in time like 10 or 15 years and function like you've baked in today's environment into your lifestyle? Imagine going back 15 years ago
Right.
and being handed a bunch of paper forms to fill out and hand around and fax in, and we were still getting my favorite, kind of going back in the time capsules. We used to have what we called various payroll input methods, right? So how do you put your payroll HR data in? Mobile, obviously, being a breakthrough, cloud or SaaS being, kind of mainstream. Folks still faxed it in, but my favorite, called it in
Yeah.
on the
Called
phone.
it in.
Yeah.
We've called it in. Yeah.
Yeah.
My
Yep.
favorite,
While I
my
was in
all-time
labor, called it in while I was in labor at ADP payroll.
I hope they got it right.
I hope so
My
too, but I
favorite
didn't
was
care after that.
you didn't focus on other things on your mind. My favorite was there's something called Road, and because every client would be set up and what was their input method. And so Road was in densely populated areas, we would have drivers go out and drop off worksheets, and people would fill them in by hand. These are for folks who had not yet adopted fax technology,
Wow.
and
Oh
then
my
the drivers would go back and pick them up and bring them to a data processing center where people would just literally sit there and rekey them in. And it shows you how far we've traveled in just one generation's lifetime.
Okay, I'm glad you shared that because you're right. Sometimes I feel like, why aren't people adopting faster? But then when you look at maybe all of the things we have adopted, and we have adopted a lot in the last 15 years, truly.
If you think about it, though, Trish, I mean, it was sort of the very, very beginning of the primacy of talent management. Remember that? That was like, and that, of course, Meg, you talked about it as being, the employee experience, but it was still just like, oh, well, this is actually how HR is going to become strategic. It's going to be through talent management. And we don't care about all the back office HR things. And that whole world has shifted dramatically. But I remember, when I think 15 years ago, like that's pretty much when you and I met, right, Lisa?
Yeah, I was about to bring Lisa
I
in
met
to get
Lisa
some
there,
of
yeah.
that. Lisa, I was about to bring her in because I wanted to get she's the only person on this show right now who's an actual HR leader, like right now. And I would, we've been talking a lot about technology. I'd love to get your thoughts, a little bit on some of the changes as they actually affect the HR leader role and what's happening inside the organizations and how people are experiencing work.
Well, it's actually interesting. I was thinking about 2009. I had left the HR tech space because I was so fed up with how slow moving HR people were. I decided I was going to go start a state farm agency and I was going to run my own business and get the hell out of this space because I felt like I was beating my head against the wall, right? But fast forward, the first time I was on the show with the two of you was the day that I got announced as the chief HR officer for Ceridian. We were in Beverly Hills. You all were there. We had a motorcycle that just kept running behind us in the show. And it's interesting because while we've advanced a lot, HR hasn't advanced nearly as much as I wish it had in this period of time, right? Like I think about the technology platforms that I'm leveraging today, and I still have some of the same frustrations with how they're not truly built for humans. And they still keep us from having accessibility to the right information. They aren't to the level of predictability that they need to be too. And so I totally agree. We've made huge strides, like from where I was when I was in 2010, then when I went back into the space, and Cecile, that's when I met you at Ultimate Software. There's still a lot to do. We're in the process of implementing UKG right now. I'm blown away at how much hasn't changed in 10 years. So, listen, I want to say we're getting there. We are, but as an HR practitioner,
Not fast enough.
Thank you. Right. And Don, you mentioned Gen AI, right? Like we're trying to figure out all the ways that we can have the right data set to feed those things so that I can start to move things off of the people team and have them focus more on high touch, high value versus some of the tactical work we still need to do. But even then, the resistance to that reminds me of the resistance to mobile, right? Like I've got people going, wait, stop. What are you talking about? I'm like, why do I need an internal comms person anymore? Like I've got this technology, throw some stuff in there, tweak it. I'm like, I don't need a person for that, right? There's still so much resistance. So I think no matter how far ahead we go, HR is always going to be the last to really be provocative and innovative and adoptive of these things. And my hope was I'd come on the show today and tell you it was radically different. It's not radically. We've moved ahead. But I talk to CHROs all the time who are in the same place I am. They're like, it's not fast enough. We're not getting to where we need to be quick enough. And that's not technology's fault. I actually think it's a combination of both. Technology is not advancing, but humans also aren't adopting and accepting at the rate they need to be.
Yeah.
And I feel like that
Interesting, isn't it,
happens
though?
every time there's a technology change, though, right? So if you look at the move to the cloud, you look at adoption of mobile, you look at generative AI, it's the same process each time where it's like a technology change has happened. What does that mean for me? What does that mean for my business? What does that mean for my profession? And how am I going to move with that? I will say with generative AI, what I am seeing differently is it's the first time I've seen HR take a new technology and lean in. It feels much more like the mobile in that it's not a scary tech thing I don't understand. It's I understand this at a personal level, and so I can see the potential. There's still obviously going to be a question around, how do I make it safe? How do I make sure that I'm taking care of my employees and protecting? But I'm seeing a lot more interest in this wave, much like what happened with the phone, the iPhone. But I think
Rather
there's
than
even more
fear.
interest.
For
I
sure.
Rather
reckon,
than
I reckon
fear,
the
right,
cloud,
Gretchen?
though.
Go
Yeah.
ahead, Mike.
I reckon I saw the when SaaS was a thing, when it was early. I think HR took up SaaS faster than the accounting department. It had a heritage from, folk like ADP had kind of like sort of pushed into sort of online delivery early. So there was there was some kind of heritage in SaaS. But I think at the early days of SaaS, HR was one of the first to actually really adopt SaaS. So if you look at those business models, they're one of the first. It just sort of went through a lull in the middle is what I think happened, Gretchen. And I agree with you. It's now uptaking technology, in generative AI, maybe quicker than some other parts of the business. But certainly, I don't know. I think HR. There's a lot of people in HR who are trying to challenge and experiment all the time, and they have actually helped our industry a lot.
But I think sometimes that's when it truly serves the purpose. In the case of SaaS, right? It was when you had distributed a distributed workforce, it absolutely made a difference in that case. And with Gen AI, I think there's finally this idea, because we all know that self-service was sort of a failed experiment in many ways, right? That there's actually the opportunity to take some of the crap off of HR with generative AI if done right. And I think that everyone thought, oh, self-service is going to do that. Well, dumbed down admin isn't really going to help HR that much, or employees for that matter. But with Gen AI, I think there's finally an opportunity, and I think that changes the game a little bit. So I think if it serves the purpose appropriately, I still think there's a lot of throwing of technology though that isn't necessarily solving real problems yet, because we haven't zeroed in on that. But I think it'll come. Actually, I'm pretty optimistic. But it's easy for me to see that not working there.
No, to your
Duncan.
point, it's a fair critique on self-service, because it didn't make the work go away. It just shifted it around, right? So it's like I'm going to do it, you're going to do it, but the work still had to get done.
Yeah.
The promise, and obviously it's very early stages, but in theory, the promise of AI is to actually take the work off the
Absolutely.
collective organization's plate, as opposed to just divvying out the workload in different orders. So we'll see. It's early stages, and as Lisa pointed out, every single one of these new technologies goes through its adoption curve. But luckily our industry, we're I don't know that we're the leaders on it. I think IT has gotten out fastest on it, but maybe being a fast follower is not the worst place to be on some of these things, and certainly not the laggers like those Luddites in finance can be, right?
Well, you know what? I'm glad you mentioned sort of that, maybe not being the first, but I think one of the things that was missing 15 years ago was learning how to do some of these things, learning about the different technologies that were coming or that were new. And that's one of the reasons I started listening to the show to begin with. When Steve created it, it was more for the purpose of community and gathering like-minded, or similarly, I would say like-minded, but similarly, interested in the same things together. And as a practitioner, I was absolutely fascinated when he would have guests on who would be talking about how they were implementing any little shred of technology. Because sometimes I was at places like PwC where we were, And then I went to a smaller, children's hospital where we weren't. So it gave me kind of perspective. I'd love to just kind of go around, and maybe this time we'll go backwards. We could start with Cecile. What were some of the memories you have of favorite memories of either a show you were on or even just something you might have learned on the show? What kind of comes to mind when you think about why the show was important?
So, not to be too much of a fangirl or anything, but actually one of my favorite memories, first of all, it was always a highlight anyhow. Regardless, I was always like, oh, I'm so excited I get to talk to Steve. And then when you joined Trish, it was Steve and Trish to talk about some things. But one of my very favorite memories, and one that really stayed with me, was when Gretchen and I were both on the show together from HR Tech. And
Yes.
we
I
had
remember
this
that.
sort of really vendor-free, very open, honest conversation that focused on people. And Trish, you were always the first to sort of grab onto. It's like, I love how you're focused on people. And I'm like, can we please bring it back to what's like, who's actually using this and all that. And I just remember that particular conversation being incredibly easy. And Gretchen and I think we exchanged information afterwards, because it was just like we had this very again, it was sort of like an I don't know, it just felt like a very natural conversation about what really needed to change. And I think that the forum that you provided at HR Tech, to bring people together, to bring vendors who were supposed to be
sworn enemies, right?
competitors or sworn
Enemies.
enemies together, was really refreshing. And we had this sort of just delightful conversation about what was happening. And it was one of the best, for me personally, it was one of the best shows, just because of the fact that you brought us together to have a very open conversation about, and it was an interesting time also. It was sort of, there was a lot going on in employee experience and what was happening specifically. It had gone beyond sort of the very early stages of employee experience, where we were really digging into what it meant to support employees and what that was going to look like in the future. So that was one of my favorite memories, honestly. And I can't even remember which year that was, but it was probably about eight years ago.
Yeah.
Gretchen?
At least, yeah.
Probably, yeah.
It was always interesting trying to bring people together, whether it was on this show or some of the things we did at the conference, when you had folks from different competitors kind of sharing space, and depending on who they were and what their company's agenda may or not have been at the time, it was either easy or not so easy. And you guys made it easy and things like that. And I'm sure we probably asked you before, and hey, is it okay if you're on the show with someone from, XYZ company,
Right.
kind of thing. But maybe at the end of the show, I'll tell my favorite story about that. It's not actually related to the podcast, but it's an ADP story, Don, and you may remember it. But
Oh God.
Sounds like, oh no.
it's a fantastic story, and I'll never forget it. But I thank you for saying that, Cecile. I appreciate that, because one of the things we tried, here, is to get past some of that stuff where we could, and we couldn't always do that, right? There was a time, and Gretchen and Meg will know this because I worked with both of them. There was a period of time I was working for Oracle and still doing the show. Speaking of warm and fuzzy, Oracle let me continue to do it, which was, I'm shocked.
You're welcome.
Right?
I made a big
that your
point about
decision?
that when you joined our team. I was like, this has to happen.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I knew that, and I maybe forgot, but thank you, because I know I got a talking to about something I did, but it wasn't this. It was something else. But I think so, because I think ultimately the people that we became friends with and became connected to in the industry, and leaders like all yourselves, honestly, you could tell that you all were very genuine about what you were trying to accomplish. Sure, you want your company to win, to succeed, and you've got all the goals, but I always felt like with everybody on this call, there were bigger goals in mind, right? Besides just the quarter, right? Or whatever metric you were chasing at the time.
Yeah. Gretchen, how about you? I mean, was your favorite memory then also with Cecile, or was it like something complete? She's gonna be like, no, it was not that one.
No, it absolutely was. And what I remember about that was, I don't think I knew until the day we got there that we were even doing it. It was kind of like, oh, they're recording the show. I'm totally showing up. And I remember Cecile and I were like, so when do we get to be the guest host? Steve gets sick. We're totally
still
filling in
we
and
need to
taking
do
on.
that.
Absolutely. It
You
was
It would
each
have been
could
so
be a
much
good
fun.
guest host on this show.
You
Yeah.
can do it now,
Yeah.
Gretchen, next week if you
Sure.
want
There we go.
Hey,
Fabulous.
pick a
No,
day.
absolutely. But I think the other part of it, and I think what Cecile is saying is really important. You guys have always this session has always been about not just the technology, but like the humanity behind it. And to me, that is the biggest thing because we all know about those opportunities where you can geek out on the technology. I certainly have those times too. But I love that this is always, in its colleagues, its friends, but it's connecting that technology to the people and the humanity and how does the technology actually impact people. And to me, that is one of the most important things, is that we're not just saying do the technology because that's the business says so, or it's the newest coolest thing. It's really coming back to what is this going to actually do for the people that use the technology, for the way we're going to change how work works. And for me, we're changing the way people interact, one interaction at a time, right? So to me, these sorts and share that with other people is just so much fun. So I'm just always so grateful when I get to sit and talk with you guys, because I learn something and walk away with a clarified perspective every time too.
Oh, I
Yeah.
love that. You mentioned too, like it's more than the technology. It is about those very specific moments. And I think that's why when Steve asked me to be on the show with him originally, that's what I hoped to bring, because I felt like he was so great at the tech part and I was a practitioner tech person, right? So it was just a different thing. And I'll give you an example. Don, when you mentioned payroll and being able to do it mobile, and when that was very new, my last HR job, we used ADP, and I would manually approve all of the exceptions, right, for payroll. And it would be stacks of paper, and I would be staying until 7, 8 o'clock at night. And then it was another hour and a half to drive home. And so when I see stuff like that now, which is even, right, far more advanced in all the companies you all have worked for, that would have given me time back with my kids. I would have been at dinner with my kids if I had mobile pay. I would have, been at practices more or whatever. And I mean, Lisa, maybe we go to you next in terms of just like, favorite memories, but like I've watched all of your kids grow up, and Lisa, especially you. I mean, being a working executive, both in technology and in HR, I was so drawn to you because you had little girls and they are basically the same age as my kids. So maybe talk about like what got you interested in even listening to the show to begin with, and maybe a favorite memory.
Yeah, it's interesting. My kids still don't know what I do for a living, and they're 25, 18, and 16. They just think I'm like this person who sits around and tells people what to do all day.
That's
So,
right, right?
no, listen, I was just thinking about my favorite memory, and it honestly was when we were outside of the hotel in Beverly Hills, or
Yeah.
I guess we're in Hollywood maybe. And I think the reason it stuck with me so much and what got me really into the show was it was a point in my career that I was taking a major pivot and I was scared shitless. Sorry, you have to put an E on this now. My apologies.
No, no.
And being able to sit down with the two of you after such an announcement was just made. I mean, it was literally hours before. You brought a calmness to me, moving from building HR technology to now being the consumer of it, right? And going from being a product person to a practitioner. I was petrified. I saw so much opportunity, but I was also like, okay, if I navigate this the wrong way, these are human beings that are going to be impacted by the decisions I make or don't make, or the things that we do or don't do. And I remember us just getting real about what it was going to be like to make that transition. And the questions that you asked me about, what am I going to think about first? How am I going to approach this? And my whole plane ride home from California, that's all I thought about. And from that point on, that's when I really became even more of an active listener and got deeper into this, because you impacted me at a very pivotal point in my career. And it's been exciting to be a part of this journey. What I will say is, Don, you mentioned the human side of this, and I think that's more my focus is now. I'm less concerned about the technology than I am the actual experience. But what does concern me is we are starting to do things very differently at Perceptix in the people team around how we think about work, how work is designed, how our teams are designed. And our technology is not designed to support that at all. Like, we are purposely moving away from the construct of jobs and we are moving to a focus on work and tasks and building it around people and teams. There's not an HR platform out there right now that does that the way we need it to be done, right? And so when I talk about HR not always being provocative, my goal now is to radically change that and to be first on everything, change the experience and let the technology catch up. It's just really hard to manage that when you don't have technology that supports what you're doing, and it still wants job descriptions and job codes and things like that, right? So, but thank you. I don't think I've said that enough to the two of you. You literally lifted me up on a day that I was elated and not sure what the heck I had just signed myself up for. So thanks for being a part of it.
Well, thank you. And I just want to say, when you tell that story, Lisa, and I'm thinking to myself, man, like how lucky have I been? Like this silly little thing we started in '09, and I'm getting invited to hang out at some fancy hotel in Beverly Hills and talk to
Right.
you. Like,
I mean, we saw Jennifer
that
Aniston
happen?
that night. That besides the two of you, that was my other highlight. I'm like, oh my God, that's Jennifer Aniston. And everybody told me I couldn't go running up to her. I needed to stay back. I was like, okay, fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
That's
I
awesome.
think what's fun about that, number one, thank you, because I love hearing what impacted each of you, and because we don't always know that, right? All of us, we don't know when we're impacting people and what they take away from those experiences with us. But I think too, yeah, definitely going from someone who was a consumer of technology to being warmly welcomed by every single person on this call into, starting out as a blogger, not even an analyst, right? Like, while I was still a practitioner. I mean, Mike, you let me write a blog post on your website, and I was just like, oh my God, I've made it. I have made it.
Hey,
I am a blogger.
I had to
right?
walk into Meg Bear's office once. I was super intimidated. Like I
I'm
remember,
so intimidated by these people.
yeah, for real. And I'm like, oh man. But she was like the coolest person ever, right? And I
Yes.
think that's a big part of what we've done on this show too, is hopefully I mean, these are all C-suite, CEOs, chiefs of whatevers and things, and Ola Couture, which is fantastic. Like, but to say that it can be intimidating for people, especially less senior people in their careers, to
Right.
even talk to people like who are on this call. So yeah, Meg, thank you. I'm gonna thank you for that. You were nice to me.
Legend. I'm putting legend out there now, and I'm really questioning life choices. Never having been invited to meet with you guys in Beverly Hills, I think we need to work on that.
Well, Meg, while we're talking, why don't you go next? Like, what favorite
Yeah.
memory or anything that just
Of
made
course,
pop in your
I
mind?
I have several fond memories, and I do really want to reflect in a similar fashion that being able to connect in this with this community and in HR technology in general, I feel really privileged because for me, it has always been about the ideas as much as it has been about the company. And so coming from wherever I've sat, which has been several different places, I've always felt welcome and I've always felt like I was learning because of the community that you've built and because of the real generosity that everybody brings to making sure that their ideas are there to serve what we want to see as the future of work and how we all want to thrive in the future. So I love the perspective of asking ourselves, how would we survive if we had to go back to what we were 15 years in the past, and thinking about that on the forward looking. As it relates to favorite moments, I kind of have two. One was, of course, the live show, because I really think the live shows bring something interesting. And Steve decided that he was running a conference, so he sort of blew us off. So I got to meet George. So
I
Amy
remember that.
were on a live show with you, Trish and George, and that was a really fun experience because I was just coming back to the HR community, and as I mentioned, felt really welcomed, but also really enthusiastic to see how much had happened while I was out and what was kind of the new ideas. And then secondly, the conversation we had that was Jill Papalka and myself when we were talking about people sustainability, and
Yeah.
Trish, just how much your eyes lit up and just how far we've come and how far we haven't come yet with that conversation. The idea of making the investments we make in people and the investments we make in HR sustainable, not just within the company, but within the world writ large. So I'm excited when we get to talk about those kinds of why moments, And I think those are two that come to mind for me anyway, personally.
Thank you for sharing those. I will tell you, it's like when you weren't in for that short time when you weren't in the HR world, it it's like when you come back, it's like this entire group. When I see you all, it's like family. It's like my long lost cousin or, whatever. And it does have a bond, and it doesn't matter what company, because everyone on this call has been in different companies, right? And I've even done a stint with a vendor as well, and Steve obviously as well. So I think we get it to a more personal level. And you're right, Steve, these are all executives, and people sometimes get intimidated to speak to an executive and get their real perspective. So for me, that's what I'm always hoping to get out of each of you that have been on the show, is like, you're people first and foremost, and you're really open to talking with anyone at any level of the organization, answering questions, being real. And that's what I think hopefully is inspiring that next, those level of managers of HR to step up and do more. So
Yeah. Trish, we're like getting close to the top of the hour, and I want to make sure we don't overstep
Yep.
anybody's schedules
Nope.
and things like
Let's get-
that. I guess the
let's
last
get
thing, real
started,
quick,
Mike.
we'll do a quick roundtable on this one.
Okay.
It is our 15th year as a podcast. We're celebrating. Cups are on the way. Whoever did not get one yet, I said there's a trawler on its way to New Zealand.
Yeah.
There's a steamboat on its way to Provence,
I know.
Cecile.
I know.
But we did
Sorry.
send those out. But the theme we're asking all our guests, on just when we do the normal podcast, is celebration, right? What is something you want to celebrate, whether it's a personal thing, business thing, something in the world? What's something it's worth celebrating right now in your life? Let's go to Mike Carden. I'm going to ask you first, and it could be just coffee's on the horizon for you shortly. You could be celebrating that.
I just want to celebrate you guys, Trish and Steve. Look, I think that you go back 15 years, we were at a time of like absolute, shift in the world of HR. HR had come from kind of labor and relations, like it come from time and attendance, and was starting to create this strategic, talent space. And I remember events like HR Evolution and stuff, where I kind of like suddenly there was a community of people coming together talking about the way that HR was going to change. And that stuff was super important. And it's funny, Trish, you said that you kind of like, hey, you got to be on our blog, but I remember going into a room full of folk, like yourselves and Laurie and Jason Lawrence and so on. It was like, to me, I was this little tech dude from New Zealand. It was like, I've arrived. It's like I'm meeting Kanye or something. It was
Oh
like,
my gosh.
there was this real sense of energy and community around that, which you folk have carried on. But I just want to kind of celebrate the genesis of that, and the fact that you can actually sustain it for 15 years. That's incredible. Totally
That's
worth
awesome.
celebrating.
Mike, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, that's good stuff. Yeah. How about you, Don? You got a lot to celebrate, but I mean, give us one.
Well, I think we talked about the humanizing aspect of what we try to do here, and from my perspective, just something that I've enjoyed is, I think Lisa, you mentioned your kids have no idea what you do, and I know I struggled with that a long time, but now I've got two of mine are out in the workforce, and both of them are using ADP technology at their jobs. It's like, oh, finally. You get it.
Nice.
And it's pretty, like, in fact, like my one uses the ADP mobile app and she loves it. She goes on the paycheck comparison tool, and they like it. And I was like,
gosh.
it's like I've been trying to break
is pretty
through
cool.
for 20 years, and now we finally got somewhere. So it's it's kind of, obviously it's neat to see your kids using the fruits of your labor. It's also a good reminder back to what we were talking about, at the human at the end of the chain here.
Yeah.
Right?
Multiply those two kids by like 10 million, right? That's how many people are doing that. So that's the impact, right, you're having on the world and the world of work. So that's huge. That's a great story, Don.
Yeah. It's a good reminder. It's like, hey, as we're building technology, I'm building this for my children.
Yeah.
That's
right.
It.
And everyone else's. So hopefully we do a good job.
Yeah. How about Meg? How about you? What's my celebration?
So I've got a lot of things to celebrate right now. I'm in this great sort of sabbatical liminal space, but what I would like to celebrate with this group specifically is really the experience and expertise that we're bringing to this next round of innovation. So if we recognize that the innovation curve is speeding up, and we recognize the amount of collective wisdom and crystallized intelligence that we have around this table and in other virtual tables of innovators and thought leaders that we all know and respect. I truly believe we're in a unique opportunity to do something really amazing going forward. And I'm in the optimistic side of celebrating that right now.
Awesome. I love it. I love it.
I love that.
How about Gretchen, you next? What's your celebration for the year?
Got a lot to celebrate. Going along Don's comment, my kids have always been my petri dish of what is happening, and everyone kind of every year gets to hear like where are they in the world. So two successful humans launched and off the payroll is an
Wow.
amazing thing, and changing
That's
the
very
world,
big.
working with autistic kids,
Oh,
working with
I love
immigration.
it.
So like things that really are affecting the broader world. So on the personal side, I have a lot. On the
Wow.
professional side, I have to say, I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to work where I do, where, while ServiceNow is changing the world of work and putting so much out there in terms of AI, there is equally a huge emphasis on growing people and growing culture. And so the amount of time that I'm spending right now working with early in career new hires who are trying to figure out what this work thing is, and having that opportunity to really think about what could that world look like for them is, to me personally, just so exciting, and I think another great way to give back. So that's really my big celebration for the year. Not just the
Awesome.
tech, but the people.
Great. And not just, well, I'm going to ask Lisa, because it sounds like you've got children around that same life stage as well. Lisa, can you celebrate getting some people off the payroll as well?
I was lucky enough, my oldest is off the payroll 2 years now. She finished her master's in gainfully employed, which is wonderful. I have one that's going to college in the fall.
Nice.
So it'll be nice. And hopefully the career choice that she's making will get me back on her payroll at some point in time. But yeah, I mean, it's been awesome to watch 3 young women start to become their own, and learn from some of the things that I've done that have been mistakes, and also some of the things that I've done that have been successes. And then from a professional level, like everybody's talked here, like the Perceptics is going through a radical transformation now, going from a survey and services organization to truly a platform and insights and behavior change organization. And it's really fun to be part of that. Not just the technological part, but back to what you were talking about, Gretchen. Our company is shifting radically, and everything about us is changing, and it's fun to be a part of that. And we've made some really, really positive strides thus far. Not to say we're doing everything right. We've got our own bumps. There's things that aren't going the way we planned, but to be able to help lead that charge and see the impact it's making on those people that still choose us every day, that's next to my daughters and my husband, that's like the greatest success I can have.
Awesome. Thank you so much,
Congratulations.
Lisa. All right, Cecile, you're last, but because I saved you for last because I wanted to follow up with some olive oil questions. So
No problem.
you've got to be celebrating the fact that you're in a beautiful part of the world doing some really interesting things.
I really, really am actually. I've had an interesting few years. I had some personal tragedy, losing my mother and then my brother, and part of that was a realization that celebrating being alive and family and all of those things has really, really been on the forefront. Moving to Provence and like buying a house that had these incredible 300-year-old olive trees, and then that had been neglected, and like
Wow.
I'm actually, believe it or not, olive oil is self-sufficient, which means that I make enough olive oil to give it to close friends. Obviously, I have not delivered it to you all, so I'm
right.
gonna have to do that.
I'll be checking the mailbox.
And absolutely. And but even beyond that, I've got 2 kids who are off the payroll who my daughter is actually at UKG and does some remarkable work in accessibility. So she sort of was an anthropologist and followed a little bit in my footsteps, which was kind of interesting. Very humbling actually to have a child sort of do some of the things that you were focused on. But so I mean, I have a lot to celebrate. I have 2 self-sufficient, happy children. My father is actually visiting us right now in Provence.
Nice.
And so, yeah, I'm actually sort of celebrating that. I feel like I did what I could in the workforce and in the workplace, and I'm kind of celebrating that was enough for a while. What I'm, helping my daughter potentially launch into another area, and supporting difference. I think many of you know I have a child who's on the autism spectrum, who's a wonderful, human contributing to the world every single day. Went to Barnard, so I mean, clearly she's got a lot to offer. But from my perspective, celebrating being enough, also not always having to do more. Although I know all of you are constantly doing more. Although I think probably you're taking a little bit of a break. But yeah, being an haute couture is figuring out, like, I go out every day and I'm like, the olives are growing, and it's an incredibly fulfilling sort of a respite right
Yeah,
now, after
that's
having been kind
fantastic.
of high powered and never nonstop. So just know that on the other side of all of this, there's peace and a lot of other things that you can do too.
I love it. It's a lot of people
So anyhow, but thank you for
nodding.
having me.
Well, Cecile, it's
Yeah.
been great to see you, and thank you.
Great to see you too.
Do I need the extra virgin, or just the extra is fine?
It's
for
it's
mostly what
all
I'm
extra
doing?
virgin. I mean,
Okay,
I take
okay.
them to the press. It's all, you absolutely do.
I do.
You want,
Thought so.
the early green olives versus the later
Yeah,
the
okay, good to know.
olives, totally different.
All right. Well, listen, we could go on and on about that. We'll call you offline, Cecile.
We
I'll,
will, absolutely.
My 17 other questions. I'll tell that ADP story some other time.
Okay.
It's probably too long to tell now. Trish, this has been super fun. Thank you, first of all, for being here for almost all of the 15 years. And honestly, being the inspiration behind getting this group together. Because I'm like a typical guy in many ways. I've been like, yeah, it's 15 years. That's fun.
It's
Nice.
like
I
people
don't
don't
even
like,
care.
what do they care?
Yeah,
I'm
I
like,
did not think anybody would show up, honestly. So
good.
thank you. I appreciate that. But thank you, of course, for
Thank
everything
you.
you've
No,
done.
and thank you for creating the show, because like I said, I was a listener for a long time, or a guest host every now and then, and I not only I learned a lot, but I think, again, being closer to everyone on this episode for sure, making me see that I can make a difference. I think that was the big takeaway for me, that each person that's appearing here today has had a personal impact on me to show me how, as a human, I can make a difference in the world.
Yeah.
And I definitely, I love to hear that, whether it's personal connections to different accessibility needs or things that your businesses have done. I mean, I think all the way back to like SAP, for example, back in 2015, we were talking about accessibility and autism being on the spectrum, and
We
getting
just
in
had
the workforce.
we just had the CEO of Autism Speaks on the show a couple months
We
ago.
did.
Like, so I love how it circles back, right, to some of the
Does. But
same
I think
kind of
that's,
ideas.
we've kind of each touched on that. Technology is super important. That's why we all work, right? We're trying to do something with that, but it is that human side to me. That's always that connection. And
Yeah.
the fact that every single business on here, whether it's a past business you've worked for or something you're doing now, we're all still focused on that human aspect, right? We want to help people who are not seen as often or enough or recognized enough. Steve and I recently gave a presentation where we were talking about the difference between like underrepresented, which we all focused on for a long time, to underrecognized. And I think that's the shift. And I'm hearing that from each of you on how you're thinking about the future of work. It's recognizing and giving people opportunities who really may not ever get them. So thank you to each of you for teaching me that over the last 15 years I've known all of you. So I really appreciate
What a great group. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Meg Bear, Mike Carden, Don Weinstein, Gretchen Alarcon, Cecile Alper-Leroux, Lisa Sterling, everybody. Trish, of course, thank you. Thanks to our friends at Paychex. Thanks for celebrating with us. My little background thing is
your background thing. I'll show mine.
Thanks everybody for listening.
So for anyone who's on the radio, so we have our little 15-year logo. Every person on here, if you don't have it, you're getting it. It has the original HR Happy Hour logo and the one we've had for probably 5 years. So anyway.
Love it.
Always fun to reminisce with you all. Can't wait for your next appearances, individually or collectively or in person.
Let's do that. 15 years from now, we'll do this all again. So thank you.
No, I was going to say, I want this exact group for the 25th.
Okay.
I'm ready.
Let's go for 20 first. Can we say 20? Every 5 years, we're going to all get together.
I think
We'll be there.
hopefully the retirement home has strong Wi-Fi. But
We're
yes.
gonna all go to Cecile in 5 years. How about that? Let's all go to France.
You are all welcome. You are all welcome.
All right. Thanks to our friends
Zealand.
at
I'm down for New Zealand.
thanks to our friends at Paychex. Thanks for everybody for listening for every part of the last 15 years. Thanks so much again. We'll see you next time, and bye for now.